Do you ever fall asleep clutching a rosary in your hand? It might seem like a small thing, an almost superstitious habit, or perhaps a comfort left over from childhood. But tucked inside that simple gesture is a profound mystery, one that only a handful of souls throughout history have ever truly penetrated. It is a spiritual truth rarely spoken of, not from the pulpit, not even within the hushed corridors of the church itself. And yet it was lived out with startling intensity by the saints and unveiled with remarkable clarity by one of the most extraordinary mystics of the modern era, Saint Padre Pio of Pietrelcina. What he revealed about the hidden warfare of the night and the extraordinary power of the Rosary to shield the soul during those vulnerable hours could utterly transform the way you sleep. More than that, it could redirect the entire trajectory of your spiritual life, setting you on a path toward a peace you may have long thought was lost to you. Because here is the unvarnished truth that most people, even devout believers, spend their entire lives overlooking. When you close your eyes to the physical world, the spiritual world does not close its eyes to you. While your body sinks into the paralysis of rest, your soul does not sleep. It remains vigilant, perceptive, and astonishingly more open than it is during the clamor of the day. This is a time of profound receptivity, a moment when the walls of your conscious defenses come down. But this same openness that makes you available to grace also renders you susceptible to disturbance. And you have likely felt this already, even if you never had the words to describe it. Think of those nights when you awaken after 7 or 8 hours of rest, yet feel as though you have been laboring through a dark nightmare all night long. That peculiar, gnawing restlessness that descends upon you for no discernible reason. Those dreams that linger with you, heavy and unsettling, feeling far more like an intrusion than a product of your own subconscious. That subtle, almost imperceptible unease that follows you into the morning, clinging to the edges of your consciousness like a shadow you simply cannot shake. That, Padre Pio would tell you, is not random. It is not merely a chemical imbalance or a symptom of modern stress. It is a signpost pointing to a reality most people never have the courage to confront. The battlefield of the soul extends into the night, and the enemy never sleeps. Before we journey any further into this hidden truth, if you believe in the power of Padre Pio's intercession, I invite you to do something right now. Write in the comments of Padre Pio, "Protect my sleep." Let that be your first act of faith, a conscious declaration that you are taking your spiritual safety seriously. Stay with us until the very end, because what Padre Pio revealed about what truly transpires within the soul during the night is something most people have never been told, something the world at large has forgotten. And once you come to understand it, you will never approach your bed, your sleep, or your dreams the same way again. There is a reason why, throughout the entirety of sacred scripture, God consistently chose the night to speak. It was never in the bustling afternoon, never amid the noise and commerce of the morning hours. The night, with its profound silence and stillness, has always been the time of divine encounter. He spoke to Jacob in a dream, revealing to him a ladder that reached to the very heavens, with angels ascending and descending upon it. And Jacob, upon waking from that profound slumber, was so overcome that he exclaimed a truth that has echoed through the memory of the faithful for thousands of years. "Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it." He encountered the divine, not in a grand temple or a public square, but in the solitude of a dream, in the hidden sanctuary of his own rest. He spoke to Joseph through visions that would ultimately change the course of an entire people, guiding them through famine and into a new land. He spoke to Samuel in the deep stillness of a dark room, calling his name so gently, so softly, that the young boy did not even recognize it as the voice of God at first. He had to run to Eli, the priest, 3 times before he understood that it was the Lord calling him in the silence. The night has always been a time of encounter, not emptiness, not merely a biological necessity for physical recovery, but a sacred space, a threshold where the relentless noise of the world falls away and something far deeper becomes possible. In the darkness, our distractions are stripped away. Our pretenses vanish. Our carefully constructed facades crumble. We are left, in our vulnerability, just as we are. But here is the tension that Padre Pio never let anyone ignore. The tension that is so crucial for us to understand today. The very same openness that makes the soul receptive to grace also makes it vulnerable to disturbance. The clarity that comes from silence can be exploited by darkness as easily as it can be filled by light. And this, he insisted, is the part most people are never told. The night is not spiritually neutral. It never was. It never will be. Padre Pio spoke about this with a directness, a brutal honesty that often startled even those who considered themselves spiritually mature. He would tell the faithful that many souls experience their deepest struggles, not in the visible chaos of the day, but in the silent, invisible chaos of the night. Not through dramatic, headline-making events, not through anything that could be easily named or explained away, but through a slow, quiet, almost imperceptible erosion of peace. He was describing a restlessness that builds without a cause, an inexplicable anxiety that arrives at bedtime like an uninvited guest who refuses to leave, a suffocating heaviness that greets you in the morning, even after 8 hours of deep sleep, as if you had spent the entire night working through a brutal shift without knowing it. He believed the soul, in its openness during rest, can be touched by grace, yes, but it can also be unsettled by what he described simply as spiritual interference. And this interference, he warned, is not theatrical. It is not the way popular culture imagines it, with grotesque faces and dramatic possessions. No, it is far more subtle, far more insidious, and far more effective because of it. It is consistent, persistent, and works not through force, but through the interior life, through the imagination, through those fragile, half-conscious moments between waking and sleep where we are neither fully present nor fully gone. It is in those margins, those gray areas of consciousness, that the enemy finds his most fertile ground. Stop for a moment and consider this. How many people do you know who sleep badly? Who wake up exhausted? Who carry a low-level, simmering anxiety that has no obvious source? It is far more common than we care to admit, a silent epidemic that plagues the modern world. And Padre Pio, a simple friar with stigmata, was already speaking about its spiritual dimension decades before anyone had words like sleep disorder, or chronic stress, or burnout. He saw it for what it often was, beneath the clinical diagnosis and the medical prescriptions, a soul that had been left unprotected at the threshold of the night, a soul that had drifted into the darkness without a spiritual compass, without a shield. And his answer, his remedy, was always the same. It was not a complex psychological therapy, nor a radical change in lifestyle. It was a simple, time-honored, profoundly powerful practice, the Rosary, not as a superstition, not as a ritual performed out of mere obligation or routine, but as something Padre Pio described with a word that might surprise you. He called it a weapon. Now, do not misunderstand this. He was not speaking in an aggressive, militaristic sense. He was not advocating for violence or fear. He called it a weapon in the sense of something that actively protects, something that creates a kind of shelter around the soul that is not visible to the naked eye, but is absolutely real. It is a defensive bulwark, a spiritual armor. It is the sword of the Spirit, wielded not in anger, but in love. Think about what the Rosary actually is for a moment, not as an object to be held or a string of beads to be counted, but as a practice, a discipline. It is a rhythm of prayer, a gentle, constant return again and again to the same truth, to the same presence. Each Hail Mary, repeated with reverence, is not an empty repetition. It is not the meaningless babbling of a parrot. No, it is the soul anchoring itself, finding the same shore after drifting, saying once more with the lips, and eventually with the whole heart, I remember who I belong to. Padre Pio carried his rosary at all times. He was rarely seen without it. The friars who lived and worked alongside him, the countless souls who came to him for confession, they all testified to this simple fact. His hands, marked with the wounds of Christ, were constantly wrapped around those beads. Even during conversations, even between the celebration of Mass, even during the brief hours he allowed himself to sleep, the rosary was there. It was not a decoration, it was his lifeline, and the counsel he gave to the thousands of broken souls who came to him. Lost, afraid, grieving, crushed by the weight of their sins and the trials of life. It almost always included the same instruction. Pray the rosary. Not as the only answer, of course, but as the foundation, as the daily practice that keeps the soul oriented toward what is true, good, and beautiful. It was the anchor that held them steady when the storms of life raged. He would explain to them with profound tenderness that Mary, when called upon through the rosary, does not delay. She intercedes with urgency. She places herself with a mother's protective instinct between the soul and whatever threatens it. He believed from his own intense personal experience, and not merely from dry theological textbooks, that this protection becomes especially powerful during the night, during sleep, during those long hours when we are least able to defend ourselves against the subtleties of the enemy. Now, hold that thought in your heart for a moment. If the soul is truly more open during sleep, if the night genuinely carries a spiritual weight that most of us have simply never been taught to take seriously, then what we carry into that darkness matters more than we could ever imagine. The state of our soul at the moment we close our eyes is of paramount importance. Consider the story of a man, a father of three, a quiet, reserved man who described himself as a lukewarm Catholic for most of his adult life. He had fallen away from the practices of the faith, attending Mass only on Christmas and Easter, if at all. He was a good man, but a distracted one. He began sleeping with his rosary after his youngest daughter gave him one she had personally blessed at a shrine. He didn't do it out of any deep conviction, honestly. He did it because she asked him to, and he simply didn't have the heart to disappoint her. He placed the rosary on his nightstand, a token of his daughter's affection. One night, almost without thinking, feeling unusually anxious, he picked it up and held it in his hand as he drifted off to sleep. It felt familiar, a long-forgotten comfort from his childhood. He said later that what happened over the following weeks was not dramatic in the slightest. There was no vision, no disembodied voice, no moment he could point to and say, that was it. It was all very gradual, almost imperceptible at first. But something shifted. The nightmares that had been visiting him with terrifying regularity for years, nightmares rooted in a period of real darkness and trauma in his past, began to fade. Not immediately, not all at once, but gradually. It was the way a room slowly brightens when someone gently opens the shutters, letting the morning light creep in inch by inch. The oppressive darkness that had haunted his nights began to retreat, unable to withstand the quiet, persistent light of prayer. He eventually told a priest in confession, with tears in his eyes, that he felt for the first time in years that his nights actually belonged to him again. The darkness had become quiet. The restless anxiety had dissipated. He was sleeping, finally, like a man at peace, deeply and without fear. He still holds the Rosary every single night. Years later, it has become as essential to his nightly routine as brushing his teeth. But we must understand something crucial. That kind of change does not come from the object itself. It does not come from the piece of wood and string. It comes from what the object represents, and more importantly, from the disposition of the soul that holds it. It comes from grace, quiet, patient, persistent grace, working in the hidden, secret hours of the night. The beads themselves are just beads, they are material. But the faith they represent, the connection to the divine they facilitate, that is the power. It is the channel of grace, not the source. And this is exactly what Padre Pio pointed to when he spoke so often about the soul during sleep. When you hold the Rosary as you fall asleep, you are doing something that goes far beyond words. You may be too exhausted for long, intricate prayers. You may not have the mental energy for a full examination of conscience or a structured devotion. Your mind may be a fog of fatigue, but your hands remember. Your body remembers. Your hands can hold what your mind is too tired to articulate. They can grasp the beads, and that simple physical act, fingers wrapped around beads that have passed through decades of prayer, that have been touched by countless other faithful souls, carries an intention that the soul understands even when the conscious mind is already drifting into unconsciousness. You are saying, without saying anything, I belong to God. I entrust this night to Mary. Whatever happens in this darkness, I am not alone in it. The soul hears that declaration. The soul responds to that act of trust. This is not superstition. It is a profound spiritual law. Our physical actions, when animated by faith, have a real and tangible effect on our spiritual state. Padre Pio taught that spiritual habits form the interior life in ways we cannot always observe directly. We don't see the change as it happens, like watching a flower bloom. It is often too slow, too gradual for our impatient eyes. It is like the slow, relentless work of water on stone. You cannot see the stone being worn down in a single moment, but over the course of years, the water sculpts the hardest rock. The practice of sleeping with the Rosary, night after night, month after month, year after year, teaches the soul something that cannot be taught any other way. It teaches trust. It teaches surrender. It teaches the soul to rest, not just physically, but completely, totally. To lay down not only the weary body, but also the fears, the unresolved tensions, the deep-seated anxieties, the burdens that have no easy answer, the past hurts that refuse to heal. And if we are brutally honest with ourselves, that is the hardest thing most of us are ever asked to do. We are, by nature, people who hold on. We are clingers. We hold on to our problems, obsessively turning them over in our minds as we lie in the dark. We rehearse conversations, worry about the future, and replay the failures of the past. We hold on to our fears, meticulously rehearsing worst-case scenarios with a thoroughness that would impress any military strategist. We hold on to our resentments, replaying painful conversations, sharpening our imagined responses to people who will never hear them, poisoning ourselves with bitterness that they will never taste. We hold on to our desperate need to control what comes next, as if the right amount of mental rehearsal could somehow guarantee that tomorrow goes according to our plan. The Rosary, held so simply in the hand as sleep approaches, is a quiet, gentle invitation to release all of that. To let it all go, not into a void, not into uncertainty, not into a scary abyss, but into the hands of a mother who has never stopped interceding for her children, and into the loving, providential care of a God who, as the psalmist wrote with such quiet confidence, grants sleep to those he loves. But Padre Pio was also clear and explicit about something else. This matters greatly, so please stay with it for just a moment. He insisted that the rosary is not a charm. It is not a magical talisman that works regardless of the life being lived around it. It is not a spiritual shortcut that you can throw on your bedside table to ward off evil while you live your life in a state of sin. He warned against this kind of mechanical approach. He explained that holding a rosary while carrying a heart that is closed off to God, that is full of unrepented sin or deliberate hatred, is not protection. It is a contradiction, a sacred contradiction. It is like wearing a soldier's uniform while refusing to fight for the cause. While God is merciful and never indifferent to even the smallest gesture of faith, it remains a contradiction nonetheless. The rosary has power because of what it connects us to, and that connection asks something in return from us. And what does it ask? Not perfection. Padre Pio knew better than most what it meant to be human, to struggle, to fall, and to pick oneself up again. He carried the wounds of Christ on his body, but he also carried the weight of human frailty in his heart. What the rosary asks for is sincerity, a genuine, humble turning of the heart toward God, however imperfect, however faltering, however slow. This is why, throughout his long ministry, he always spoke of the rosary alongside other essential spiritual practices. He never separated them. He emphasized confession, which he called the sacrament that renews the soul from the inside out. He spoke of the Eucharist with a reverence that was palpable, calling it the bread of angels. And he insisted on the daily examination of conscience, a practice he considered absolutely essential for spiritual growth. It takes no more than 5 minutes, he said, but it changes everything about how a person ends their day. So, here is what he encouraged in his letters and his spiritual direction, and it is far simpler than most people expect. Before you lie down to sleep, take a few quiet, honest minutes. Do not worry about a complicated prayer routine or a perfect formula. Just practice honesty. Look back at your day the way you might look back at a path you have just walked. Do not judge every single step with harshness, but simply notice where you lost your footing, where you veered off course. Ask yourself with gentle humility, where did I close my heart today? Where was I less patient than I could have been? Where did I speak a harsh word? Where did I hold a grudge? Where do I need to ask forgiveness? From God, from someone I love, or even from myself? Do not carry that weight into the night. That is the enemy's tactic, to weigh you down with guilt and anxiety as you try to rest. Give it to God. Say it simply, in your own words, the way you would speak to someone who knows you completely, all your secrets and shames, and loves you anyway, because that is exactly who you are speaking to. He already knows. He is just waiting for you to bring it to him. If you have holy water in your home, use it. Make the sign of the cross. Ask God's blessing over your room, over your bed, over your sleep, over the very space where you are most vulnerable. This is not superstition. It is one of the oldest practices of the Church, the sanctification of ordinary, everyday spaces. It is a quiet, powerful insistence that the sacred is not confined to a grand building or a glorious cathedral, but is present wherever we consciously invite it. It is bringing heaven down to earth, to the very place where you lay your head. Then, take the rosary. You do not have to pray the full 15 or 20 decades. In fact, if you are exhausted and vulnerable, attempting a full rosary might feel like a chore and defeat the purpose of finding rest. 1 decade, prayed slowly, really slowly, letting each word mean something, is often more than enough to shift something profound in the soul. Quality, not quantity, is what matters here. A single heartfelt Hail Mary is more powerful than an entire rosary rattled off without attention. And if you fall asleep mid-prayer, drifting off mid-sentence, do not worry at all. Do not feel guilty. Padre Pio said this with a warmth and a tenderness that people who knew him remembered vividly. He said, Mary understands. She takes the intention. She receives the effort. She is not a God of perfect performances. She is a mother. Hold the rosary as you lie down. Let your hands rest around it naturally. Feel the familiar weight of the beads. It is a tactile anchor. Then say, in whatever words come most easily to your tired heart, something like, Lord, I place my soul in your hands tonight. Mary, watch over my sleep. Whatever does not come from God, keep it far from me. Protect me from the snares of the enemy. Grant me restful peace. That is enough. That is genuinely, completely enough. You have done what you can. You have placed your trust in the right place. Now, the responsibility is with God. Now we arrive at the part of Padre Pio's teaching that is perhaps the least talked about, and simultaneously the most extraordinary. It is the golden promise hidden within the battle. He firmly believed that God visits souls during sleep. Not in the extraordinary headline, making sense that we sometimes read about in hagiographies. He was always careful to discourage any kind of spiritual sensationalism. He was a mystic, but he was a practical, grounded Italian friar first. He was speaking of the quiet, ordinary sense that is actually more remarkable than any spectacular vision. The sense of a soft presence, a profound peace that settles in without any explanation at all. A clarity of mind that arrives with the morning light, as if something complex and troubling was resolved overnight. A problem sorted out while you were unconscious. A new direction that comes to you softly, without fanfare, the way sunlight gently comes through a window before anyone else in the house is awake. Padre Pio believed this quiet, divine visitation was far more common than people realized, and he believed it happened most often not to those who were the most spiritually advanced, not to those with years of formal theological training or long hours of prayer behind them, but to souls who were simply prepared, souls who had ended the day with honesty, souls who had asked forgiveness for what needed forgiving, souls who had held the rosary and whispered in whatever imperfect, sleepy manner, I'm yours tonight. Do with this night what I cannot do for myself. When the soul is at rest and at peace, placed consciously under God's providential care and under Mary's powerful intercession, it becomes remarkably receptive. It is a state of grace that is simply not available during the busy, defended hours of daylight. The walls we build around ourselves during the day, the masks we wear, the defenses we construct, they all come tumbling down in the vulnerability of sleep. The noise of the world finally stops. And God, who is never absent, who is always closer to us than we think, who is constantly knocking on the door of our hearts, he takes those hours very, very seriously. Perhaps you have already experienced this subtle miracle without even knowing what to call it. You woke up one morning and something felt genuinely different. Not euphoric, not dramatic, not accompanied by a choir of angels, but lighter, clearer, as if a decision you had been agonizing over for weeks had somehow been sorted out for you overnight, resolved in the quiet depths of your soul while you slept. Perhaps you had a night where a dream carried something that stayed with you, not as an image that faded by breakfast, but as a feeling, a direction, a quiet, unshakable certainty about something that had seemed overwhelmingly uncertain the night before. You just knew, deep down, what you needed to do. Perhaps you had a moment in the early hours of the morning, somewhere between the depths of sleep and the first stirrings of waking, where you felt a presence so calm, so loving, so incredibly close that it almost surprised you when your eyes opened to an empty room. These things are not nothing. They are not merely the random, chaotic noise of an overworked brain trying to process the events of the day. They are not psychological tricks. They are the ordinary, beautiful fruit of a soul that has over time learned to rest completely in God. And this gift is available to you. It is not a reward for achieving spiritual perfection. It is not reserved for the especially devout or the especially disciplined. It is available to anyone who is simply willing to end the day with radical honesty and to begin the night with profound trust. It is the divine economy of grace. We give God our poverty, our weakness, our vulnerability, and He gives us His strength, His peace, His direction. So here is the invitation, and it is as simple and as profound as it sounds. Tonight, do something different. Do not just collapse into bed. Make a conscious choice. Take your rosary in your hand. Pray 1 decade before you close your eyes. Do not rush it. Do not make it a mechanical obligation. Be present. Let each Hail Mary be an act of trust, a small surrender. Let each bead be a step toward peace. Then, hold the rosary as you lie down. Feel the weight of it. Make that small, quiet act of surrender the final conscious thought of your day. Give your night to God as a gift. Place it in His hands. Try this for 7 days, 7 nights. That is just 1 week. Make it a small experiment in faith. And pay attention. Not with anxious, desperate scrutiny. Not looking for results the way you might track a medication or measure a diet plan. But with the open, gentle, watchful attention of someone who has placed a precious treasure in the hands of a trusted friend and is simply waiting to see what unfolds. Pay attention to your sleep. Is it deeper? Is it more peaceful? Pay attention to your dreams. Are they less troubling? Pay attention to how you feel when you wake up. Is the morning heaviness lighter? Pay attention to your peace of mind. Is the low, great anxiety starting to dissipate? Pay attention to the quality of your thoughts in the first few moments of the morning. Are they brighter, more hopeful? You may be surprised by what you notice. The transformation may be subtle at first, like the slow dawning of a new day, but it will be real. And if something shifts, even something incredibly small, even something you are not quite sure how to name or articulate, I invite you to come back here and write it down. Write in the comments. I surrender my sleep to God. Not as a formula, but as a sincere declaration. Because there is something inexplicably powerful about putting words to a conscious decision. Even in a comment on a video, even among strangers, it makes the commitment more real. It anchors the intention in a way that a silent, vague thought sometimes cannot. It commits the soul. If this reflection has touched something in your heart today, please consider sharing it with someone you know. Do not do it for the numbers of this channel, but because you probably know someone who struggles with their nights. Someone whose sleep is perpetually restless and whose mornings are always heavy. Someone who carries a gnawing anxiety into the dark and cannot seem to leave it there. A friend, a spouse, a parent, a sibling, a colleague. Sometimes the most loving and practical thing we can do for someone is to simply pass along something that brought us peace. Send them this video. Share this message. Let them find their own way to this truth. And if this kind of content, rooted in deep faith, in the rich and ancient traditions of the Catholic Church, in the real and remarkably human wisdom that Padre Pio carried, is the kind of content you come here for, then please consider subscribing to this channel. Leave a like on this video. Consider becoming a member of this growing community of souls seeking peace. Everything we share here exists for one singular reason: to help souls find their way back to peace, back to God, and back to one another. Your support makes that mission possible. And it matters more than you know. For every soul this message reaches is one more person who will go to sleep tonight feeling a little less alone, a little more protected, a little more loved. Let us leave the final word to Padre Pio himself. He was a man of few words but immense depth. He said it simply, as all the deepest truths are simple: pray, hope, and don't worry. He did not say the night would always be easy. He did not promise that the darkness would never feel long or oppressive. But he reminded us that worry, in the end, adds nothing to the morning. It steals the peace of the night without ever promising a better future. But prayer, quiet, faithful, humble, persistent prayer, held in the hands, even when the words run dry, even when the mind is fogged by exhaustion, that changes something that nothing else can reach. It changes the soul. Your soul is not alone in the dark. It never has been. It never will be. And tonight, you have the power to choose to remind it of that eternal truth. Hold the rosary, close your eyes, and rest.